All right, we are live.
Hello.
Hello, world. How are we doing? This is awesome. I'm kind of easing into this. We're gonna ease into this um, because there's a part of me that's really scared that things aren't streaming. But I see that we're on YouTube. I see people are. I see a thumbs up, so I know that we're going at least there. Um, And so I want to welcome everyone to the Communities of Practice stream. And I want to thank you for being here because this is a really interesting topic to me. The reason why this topic is interesting to me and I think should be interesting to product folks and product teams in general is that the world is changing. Since COVID, especially, the idea of being in a place where you have people around you, where you can learn, where you can get some insight just being in an office is gone. And the fact that we are product managers and even in regular circumstances, even in offices, our jobs can be very lonely. Having a place where you can talk about what's going on to people that understand your context is super important. Not only that, but with the shrinking of, let's be honest, education and learning budgets, it becomes even more important to find spaces where you can learn from each other, learn from the world around you. And so I think what we're talking about today is an applicable solve, something that you can start literally today in order to solve both that loneliness issue that comes with the work of product management, as well as the skills issue that we're currently running into. And so, on that note, I figured I'd bring in one of the best practitioners or understanders of communities of practice that I know, Randy Silver, to come and talk about what communities of practice are, how do we do them, and then also how do you start one. And so, with that, I want to introduce Randy.
Hey, thanks, Adam. Really appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, yeah. Before we jump into it, I figured you should give folks a bit of an introduction, talk to them about the podcast, talk to them about Out of Owls, and all the cool stuff that you do.
Yeah, sure. It's funny on the podcast. I always ask everyone to do intros, and I ask them to keep it brief. And I'm really bad at being brief myself. So let's see how quickly I can do it. I was a music journalist for a long time. Then I stopped doing that and became a product manager. Worked my way up to head of product, and then about 5 years ago, stopped doing that and started consulting and doing some interim roles, doing a lot of coaching. And a couple of years ago, realized, especially at the beginning of lockdown, as you said, I realized how important the communities that I'd always done kind of on the side were, how important they were, and started to make it more and more a focus of everything else that I do. And so, along with everything you said, I think that communities of practice, and we'll talk about what a community is and how to start one and all that stuff later. But I think there's four key things that are all really critical that people really care about right now that a community can help solve. I'm not going to say solve by itself because there is nothing that any one approach is going to solve completely. But you can help solve problems with recruitment, with retention, with how quickly your team delivers value, which is something I know every company has a problem with. And you can solve issues around learning and development. And, I don't know anyone who doesn't have a problem with at least one of those things.
Yeah, yeah. So there's certainly something about that um, idea of uh, these levels or these ideas of trying to get better at your job and trying to get through this loneliness and trying to understand the world around you while there are limited resources to do so. And so I think one of the things that I want to kind of dig into before we get into to too much is how do you define a community practice? Like, what is it?
But Good question. So we all know what a community is, I hope. Um, and, to be honest, I've never thought about a succinct little definition of a community, but it's one of those things, it's when you see it. It's a group of people who come together because they want to come together, not because they're forced to be together. And a community of practice tends to be one that where people do similar things, and you're talking about how to get better at that thing and reinforcing each other, supporting each other on their journey to getting better at that specific trade or task or calling. There's also a community of interest, which is slightly different. So usually in companies, people with the same job title or similar job titles will form a community of practice. But people who are interested in, I don't know, Java or something like that, or Agile in a more general sense, will form a community of interest that crosses multiple job families, multiple things, and they talk about how that it's applicable for multiple different places. But for the terms of today, in general, if you're trying to get better at your job and you're talking to people all at one company, it's a community of practice. If it's anything else, it's probably a community of interest. And there's a huge amount of overlap, and we'll probably jump back and forth between them.
Awesome. And so we talked about practice and interest. And of course, I think for product people, especially since our jobs are so varied, right? Like you can live in both of those worlds all day, right? Even internally to a company. For example, if you have a group, if your company's large enough, you'll have product managers that are working on internal systems. And so their interests are going to be different than those who are working on, let's say, a particular feature or a particular type of feature, right? Let's just say an onboard process, right? They're looking at different things. They have different worlds that they're exploring. They have different stakeholders, although they are both a product manager and they have the same title and maybe even the same level inside of a company. And so I like that distinction because I think both are very interesting, and I think both are solves to the issues that we laid out. And so I want to jump into this idea of how, let's focus on practice for a bit. How does a community of practice work for a product team?
Let me just say that community of practice, I was at Sainsbury's in the UK for a while, a very large grocery retailer, a couple 100,000 people, and, mostly frontline staff, but, a huge, huge company. And we had about a community of practice with the entire product community, about 120 people, something like that. And yes, there was a huge distinction between people who worked on B2C and people who worked on internal systems and people who worked on employee experience and people who worked on lots of different things, and hugely different things in terms of the technologies they worked with, the approaches they had, the stakeholders, huge variation in all that. But even still, getting everyone together with in the same job family, regardless of how different the day-to-day of their job was really, really valuable. And one of my favorite things in it, and I'm sure we'll come back to this after we talk about everything else, was the idea of people getting together within the community and mentoring each other. So there was a woman who was working on some of our really ancient internal legacy systems, really creaky, slow stuff. And there's no way you can be agile on some of your approach, but not agile in your development on this stuff. And this was like mainframe style type stuff. And she paired up with a guy who was working on an internal startup, something that was only funded for a few weeks at a time. And they literally had like 5 people on bicycles trying to prove a delivery model kind of thing. And they were buying their own bikes and trying everything out. And you'd think there would be no overlap between them. But they paired up and taught each other different things and completely different ideas of how to deal with the challenges they had in their own day-to-day. And there were always lessons that were applicable that helped them shift their view and take a look at, the startup guy really got some value out of some of the stakeholder management skills. and looking at the way that legacy woman looked at things. And then she got some value out of learning the SQL queries and lookup and how to deal with metrics and prove value quicker. And it was a really interesting thing to see the two of them working together. So you can find value in unlikely places and unlikely relationships. And that's one of the things. It's the serendipity of exposing people to ideas, to people, to different ways of doing things than they would find if they just talked to the same people in the same meetings day after day after day.
Yeah, two things there for me too. Like one, as a mainframe person myself, it's like every time I hear mainframe, there's a piece of me that just goes, it's not old. But I think to your point, right? There are so many things that I picked up working in the mainframe world that are applicable, and I think helps me stand out within product teams today, right? And as I teach or coach product managers, I use some of those skills, and they go, "Hey, what is this?" Right? I've never heard of this before, but conceptually, right, in the world of mainframes, that's standard practice. And likewise, whenever I talk to somebody that is from outside of that world, or when I got exposed to that world, the world outside of mainframes, maybe 10 years ago, it was enlightening for me because I had never seen processes kind of work the way that they're doing. And also, it's super interesting because now you're starting to see these worlds definitely collide. One of my old employer, DTCC, now has product coaches, which if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, I would have been like, that's impossible, right? These things are coming together. So even more of a signal about the powers of communities of practice. And to your point, the ideas of like points of view merging in order to make better practitioners. And so, we'll go a little bit deeper into that later. Well, actually, right now, let's go a little bit deeper on the idea of product loneliness, right? I don't know about you, but I know for me, through my career working as a product manager and then a product consultant and then a product leader, all of these things are very lonely jobs because you tend to work as a one man band, right? You get dropped in and you're dealing with all these other people who don't understand. It's your job to teach them that context, but at the end of the day, right, they've never worked in it. So, right, it can get somewhat lonely. And so I wanted to ask, does that ring with you? Does that make sense to you? And then what are your experiences around that loneliness? Was that a driver for digging into more communities of practice?
Yeah, it's a problem for all of us. I hate the title, the CEO of the product. It's complete crap. But the fact is, people do treat you, if you're in a product role, like you're supposed to have answers. And my friend Monica has a much better take on it. It's not that we have the answers, it's that we're there to help people make better decisions faster. So it should be more of a facilitator role. And Monica's much smarter than I am. She says it much better. I'll give her credit every time. But the reality is, for most of us and most of our teams, we are thrust into that role. We're supposed to expected to have answers, or to at least to facilitate those answers really quick. That's hard, especially if you're new to a team or you're facing something that you haven't seen before. And you're dealing with stakeholders from any number of different areas and people asking lots of different questions. And they're all use the word I hate most in technology, which is the word just. Can't you just do this? Just hides so many sins. So the fact is, it is a really hard job. And it is one where it is hard to show vulnerability a lot of the time. A lot of people don't have the psychological safety to say, I don't have that answer, but I can get it for you. Or how can we work together to get that answer? You're expected to come with the answer. So the question is, where do you go to show that vulnerability? And I coach professionally, so that's a good place to go. But most people aren't lucky enough to have a coach. Uh, I've gone to places where I've formed informal groups with support groups with some of my peers, and that's worked really really well. I'm in some communities, but WhatsApp, Slack, things like that, and I've met lots of wonderful people through product tanks and meetups and conferences and things like that, and it's really really helpful. But the fact is, finding people who have done similar things, face similar problems to you, where you can expose yourself to some vulnerability and say, I'm not sure what I'm doing isn't working. There's got to be a better way to do what I'm doing. How can I learn it? And have no one judge you for that, and be genuine and helpful about their experience. As long as you also give them the benefit of your experience. Sometimes it's transactional, but it's a nice, even kind of transactional relationship. And it's an incredibly important thing, because there are times you cannot talk to your boss or to your stakeholder about certain things. If you're really good, you can get to the level with, if you've got the psychological safety, or if you've got the skill set, you can get to the point where you can do the kind of linguistics jujitsu on them, so that they are collaborating with you and becoming full partners in it. But they're busy. You're there to do a job. They often expect you to do it. So it takes some real doing, and you can't do it all the time. But aside from you, yeah, you're expected to be able to get the answers. So finding the place to do it, having a safe space to explore it, to learn, to get better at your practice, it's an absolutely invaluable thing. Burn out because they don't have that support network. They take the stress home with them. They wear it on their sleeves at work, and you can see those people dragging around the office. You can see them on the calls and in the Slack channels. They don't look happy. They're always stressed. It's just not a good place to be. And it's one of those things that it's like a tumbleweed. It just keeps rolling and growing and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it doesn't solve itself. And eventually, those people end up dropping out, and they're great people. We need to make sure that we keep our best people and develop them.
Yeah, I'd say this is a huge issue on the product leadership side, right? Keeping an eye on your people and helping manage burnout is ultimately, like, really one of the core ways I'll judge a product leader, or I think a product leader should be judged. Right? Where is your team at? Where are they at psychologically? Because this job can also be a place where you can trudge through. On one hand, everybody's asking you for right. Everybody's always going to ask you about what can you do for them, and they don't quite understand your background. If you are in a psychologically safe place, you have the ability to make decisions, or make better decisions that are ultimately going to lead to really good outcomes. But on the other side, you can just as easily listen to everybody, become an order taker, go through the motions, right, and just find yourself deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, until the point that you mentioned, where uh, it's over, right? That person burns out, they're running out of the industry, and that product leader now has to go hire someone else, right? I've seen it several times in my career, both as an observer, and then also as um, unfortunately, as the leader that's had to kind of clean this up. And yeah,
And it's a real challenge. You don't want to be, as a leader, you don't want to be the person who has to play hero and save people from burnout. This is a real problem that we have in companies in general, whereas somebody is seen as a hero. And the real heroes are the ones who make sure it doesn't become an emergency in the first place. The real key to making a good product team and a good product organization, really a good organization, period, is not about you coming in and saving the day. It's about creating an environment where everyone can do their best work, where you can get new ideas and encourage things. Communities, they're not the only thing that's going to do that for you. There's a rise of people paying attention to product operations, and I'm so happy that people are paying attention to it, because a good what's the word I'm looking for? A good health metric around your product team. It's incredibly important. You have to have all of the formal processes in place and do them well, because that just causes chaos if they're not done well. It causes stress. It causes burnout. The thing is, though, we all know that with the best formal processes in the world, that's not what always gets stuff done. That creates the nice infrastructure to get stuff done. But we need, especially as your organizations get bigger and you have more and more formal processes and more bureaucracy, you also have to know when those processes are the wrong thing, when they are too big and they're not there. They're there to create bureaucracy rather than to enable people to create value. So you also have to have really strong informal processes, and creating a place, a culture that focuses on both the formal and the informal, and has health around both of those, and enables people to make the right decisions, that understands why things are there. There's an idea in urban planning that's been applied to decision making. Of, in the States, you get to a four-way stop and there's stop signs on every corner. And even if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no other vehicles, you have to stop and you have to wait. Whereas in the UK and lots of other places, there's roundabouts. So you get there, you pause, you check and make sure no one's coming, and then you go. And yes, we all could do the rolling stop at the four-way stops instead and things like that, because we're not really obeying the spirit of that. But, in a big company where you have to sit and say, well, we're going to wait for the next cab or the next governance body meeting, which is in 2 weeks' time to formally ratify this and things like that, it stops teams from creating value. Whereas, if you've got the right ability, if you trust people, you allow them to communicate, they understand why things are there, then you can make this work. And the communities are an incredible way of spreading the knowledge, spreading the relationships, making sure that people are talking to each other. We talk about giving teams autonomy. And sometimes people interpret that as, well, I'm autonomous, I can do whatever I want with my team. And that works great in a startup where you're the only team. But once you have 3, 4, 5 teams and you have second and third order effects from the decisions you're making, you have to start being able to communicate proactively with the other teams. And again, it's the communities and the informal processes that do this, because you may have the formal process around status updates. No one reads those after a while. They get bored. They need to know what you're up to. They need the 3 bullet points and then to be able to talk to you rather than having to read a 5-page report every week.
So yeah, like I would, in my head, I think about this as one processes, as you talked about, right? There's a code of conduct. There's a way we do things. There's a kind of a formal, this is how we do product, or this is how we communicate. But there's also a water cooler culture that exists, right? It's very informal. How often are we getting coffee together, or this can take a million different forms. Sitting around the water cooler, the post meeting, right? These are all very informal places where those culture values are practiced, and maybe sometimes there can be linkages between the two, right? Where somebody mentions something at that water cooler that will spur someone to go back and check something that's laid out in a process, or something that ops has done, or something that has been written out formally, right? And when these two things are working together, that's when you start to have a really powerful culture. And so I think communities of practice is certainly a piece of that. The other thing I want to talk about is skills, right? I think we're in a place where skills, product skills especially, are very lacking. And it's interesting because we're in a place where the amount of information that's out there on how to do product grows, it feels like, exponentially every week. There's a new podcast, there's a new conference, there's some new content. I'm also guilty, right? I have a newsletter, I'm throwing it out every week. Yet I'm noticing that the level of skill for product managers is lowering. And I think one of the causes of that happens to be a lack of places to be vulnerable, a lack of places to practice, a lack of a way to either see it or talk to somebody who's done it before. It's almost like everybody's looking at a Medium article and checking the boxes. And I think communities of practice speaks to that. What is your experience around uh, the knowledge level or the skill level of product people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love it. I'm talking to you right now from a hotel room in Krakow, Poland, because I'm here for the ACE conference. I'm doing a talk tomorrow on very related to this topic about how the tools don't work, and we have so many product management tools out there, and it does feel like it's exploding all the time. And it's the ultimate conclusion. It's not that the tools don't work. It's not that they're broken. It's just that we don't know how to use them properly. We have this myth that I have a problem. Someone has done this before, and I can just apply their solution that they wrote about or blogged about or whatever, and magic will pop out the other end. And that's not how it works. It's the difference between dogma and philosophy. We can't just use things because someone says this was how it worked for me. We're not in their situation. We don't know what it was like for them. We have to learn to do these things on our own, and it's a craft and a practice, and that's hard. And having taught courses and been part of them, courses are wonderful, but generally, especially if they're a 1 or 2 day thing, they're an overview. They're a survey of a bunch of different things out there. And then you go back to the office on Monday and you try and put it into practice. And what I've always said at the end of a day of teaching is don't try to do all of this at once. Pick one thing and try and get that done. And then come back in a few weeks and try and add something else. So it's really important to do that. Putting things into practice is hard. There's that whole old adage of learn one, teach one, do one. I'm sorry, learn one, do one, teach one kind of thing. So to make sure you've got mastery over things. And we go straight from reading about it to trying to teach other people or not making mistakes along the way. And we forget the whole spirit of everything we do in Agile is that we shorten the feedback loop. We experiment, we try something, we see if it went well, we review it, and then we move on. And we have to apply that to our own practice. And people want to just move forward really quickly. It's hard, man. It takes a long time. You get a lot of bruises along the way. So being in a place where you can ask, this didn't work how I expected. It didn't work like I read about it in the book. Am I doing it wrong? Is there a better way? Sometimes it's you're using something at the wrong time. It wasn't the right circumstance for you to try it in. Sometimes it's you didn't have the right partners along the way, or one of the circumstances wasn't right. And yeah, this is where asking along the way and saying, halfway through a sprint, something isn't going quite how I expected. Do I need to change tack and try and save the sprint? Or is this always what it's like and it kind of resolves in the last little bit? It's really worthwhile. And having that vulnerability to ask questions will lead you to things you didn't even know to ask about. It's one of the really critical things. You're only aware of the things that you bring to the table. But if you're inviting other people in, you get the benefit of all of their experience and different ways of looking at things. And this just goes back to discovery. What else can we do? How do we keep an open mind? How do we have strong opinions weakly held? All of the stuff we talk about, we need to not only apply to the techniques that we do, but also our own practice of those techniques. And having this community, having places to talk about it is great. So much of social media is one-way communication. Having a place where you have two-way and you're not just broadcasting, but you're leaving yourself open to feedback and influence is incredibly important.
100%. And I think one of the things that really spoke to me there, and I hope to the audience, is the idea of the fact that, yeah, these are all great tools, but the ability to get bruised along the way and figure out what's the right application here. How do I use this? We often, I think, as a community, as a community of product people, we're guilty of constantly creating these tools externally. So we're more than happy to, and this is more towards right folks that have been doing this for a while. We're more than happy to talk about our way of doing things when we're in the moment, when we're running teams, or when we're a senior person with influence on other people. We let the pressures get to us in a way to where we don't extend that grace to somebody else learning. And that can also be a thing that chases people out of product because they have to find a way. It might be your way, it might be another way, but we're not giving folks the time to figure out their way. And so that's another, I think, positive of communities of practice. And so I want to go back to that, and I want to talk about what does a good community of practice look like.
I love that question. So I think a good community has a few characteristics, and the reality is everyone is different. It's a question of, is this a community that is working for you in your circumstances? But the reality is there's a few basic characteristics. One is the psychological safety for people to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, admit that they don't know things. Um, Part of that, and everything that I'm going to talk about here is interdependent on every other bit. So psychological safety, but it also means that people are coming willingly. They have to want to come. They have to see that there's value and that they are showing up, whether it's virtually, in a Slack channel or something like that, or they're coming physically to a meetup or whatever. They have to be there because they're not being forced. At the same time, the company also has to recognize that there's value in this community, and they have to make time for it. Find a no meeting time, or at least a time when there's no other meetings, and say, this is sacred time within our calendar. This is for our teams to get better, for people to practice this. They are allowed to take the time out. We're not going to think they're slacking. We're going to build it into all of our forecasts and everything else. We highly encourage people to go, but at the same time, we're not going to force them, because people have different psychological makeup. Some people get value out of this. Some people are real introverts and don't want to experience it that way. They want to lean back and they want to engage with the community by consuming the content and asking questions privately rather than participating more publicly. All of these things are really important. The real key thing, though, is no matter what it looks like, because your community can take any look any number of different ways, have lots of different behaviors. It might be a book club that gets together once in a while. It might be brown bags. It might be people going to the pub after work, or towards the end of the day, once every so often. It could be totally asynchronous. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. The key thing is, when you ask them, are they getting value from this? Do they want to keep it going? Do they find, just straight up, if we got rid of this community, would that help you, hurt you? How would you feel about it? If they say, over my dead body, then you've got it. Then you're successful with this. That's the only measure of success I've ever found that works.
So I want to go to a question that we received. Thank you, Jane, for the question. Um, Jane asks, what types of activities do you do when the community of practice meets?
Yeah. So again, it depends on the community. I think the easiest one to start with is a really simple one of just take a lean coffee perspective. Let people come in, let them vote, let them make some suggestions and vote themselves. There's definitely some curation that goes on, especially to get a community going. You're not going to be always responsive completely. You might not always have the best answers if people are asking questions that you're not prepared to answer yet, or you don't have enough information. If you have a bunch of people who are trying to explore a problem, but they haven't done any research or don't have experience in it, then you're acknowledging that's an issue, but you need to come back and do some curation and programming around how are we going to learn more about this? How are we going to discuss this in a more informed way in the future? Um, but there's so many other things you can do. There's one good thing to do is an icebreaker activity because you want everyone to get together and get to know each other. You want to break down some barriers. If you're a leader, you want to make sure that you're demonstrating that it's an open space. You want to be able to admit to any failures or problems that you've seen. Let it be known that people aren't going to be judged there, that they have the ability to admit the same type of things as well. But in terms of activities, you can go into breakout groups. You can go into small one-to-one or troika type mentoring activities. You can do book clubs. You can do brown bag lunches. You can encourage people to speak up on something that they've got expertise in, whether it's directly related to product or not. Just anything to build the community and start talking about different things is a good thing. There's an amazing resource, an amazing site called Liberating Structures, which has tons of different types of activities for teams and different ways of doing it, for getting groups of people to communicate well with each other in different ways. If I don't know what else to do with a community one day, I'll just look up Liberating Structures and pick one that seems like fun and introduce it to everyone and just see where they go. And the Liberating Structures are just frameworks for the conversations. Success to me at a community, if it's an in-person get-up, is just that you see people enjoying conversation with each other. And if that's going well, then they'll want to come back. It's just like, throwing a dinner party or drinks or anything like that. What about you, Adam? Any tips from you on that one?
Well, you mentioned two that I particularly like, right? When in doubt, lean coffee it out. So I often, if I'm stuck, I'll just kind of throw that in front of the team, not just in communities of practice, but in front of stakeholders or pretty much many situations, like almost any situation I'm in, and even like you do it in one-on-ones, honestly, if like there's no agenda, right? I'm a big fan of lean coffee. And liberating structures is also a place where like I'll poke around. I think another thing that I like to do when thinking about communities of practice or influencing one if I'm on the leadership level or running one if I'm on the IC level, which that distinction I think we'll talk about in a second. But I love the idea of presetting or thinking about what are the problems that the collective group has at the end of a practice or getting that beforehand and coming up with a solution. One person coming up with an idea or solution, right? And seeking or trying to understand what the other and getting feedback, right? And so almost like a salon type of kind of back and forth where you introduce a problem, the team introduces critique, and then after that critique is introduced, the person talks about what they received and what kind of works and what doesn't from their point of view and builds on that, right? And all of this happening within the span of 15, 20 minutes, which opens the floor up for kind of other discussions that are based on kind of that and interaction.
And if you want to get better at that, one of the key things to do is invite a designer, someone who went to design school, because they're trained in doing that type of critique. And let them show you how to do it, and they'll be very happy to do so. It's something we don't do nearly enough of in product.
100%. If somebody's been a part of a design crit, they are the person to talk to as it relates to learning and doing this because they've done it. Right? They've done it over and over again, and it's a part of their regular practice if they've gone to design school. And so, yeah, I brought up that distinction between individual contributor product managers and product leaders. What is your thought on that distinction when it comes to communities of practice?
They're all welcome, to be honest. I mean, almost anyone who is an IC or a product leader was a product manager at one point, hopefully. They've got some experience and worthwhile things to share in terms of the actual doing. And hopefully they also have worthwhile experience in terms of a lot of the problems that we encounter are ones of perspective. Is in I'm the product manager for feature X. That is obviously the most important thing in the world, no matter what else is going on. Therefore, we should just solve the problems with feature X. Because doing that will get us $5 million next year. What we don't know is that feature A is going to generate 50 million, and there's a reason that you're being ignored in X land because A has been considered more of a company priority, but you're not in those meetings. You don't have that perspective. So having the more senior IC or a leader there who has been there or has that perspective and can explain things to you about that is really valuable as well. So yeah, get anyone that you can together. Bring everyone there, but make sure that everyone checks their ego at the door on this stuff. That they know that you're not there to school anyone in a negative way. That it's the success of everyone is of any individual is only as good as the success of the community as a whole. You're there. The word community is there. It's about what you're trying to do together rather than individually. But the more you upskill each person and help them understand the context of everything and the skill set, that's the really key thing.
It's interesting because I don't know if I like product leaders there, and um, one of the things, unless they're really experienced, right? Like I think it takes a particular type of product leader that has a lot of trust from the ICs, which is a level. Um, it requires a level of self awareness that I have seen
Yeah,
product leaders not display in the past. There are a few that do, and there are a few that don't. Um, the
that's really fair. There's is is the product leader necessary to the group? Is it going to make things better? You have to be able to read the room and understand the community. I've been to places, last time I was working in a startup or a scale up, where, maybe 5 product teams. Me as the leader kind of needed to be there, because there just wasn't enough experience in running a community and getting it started. I was the person who had that that experience. I was the right person to be in the room. But there were other times when I wanted them to do things without me. They needed to have the safety to do it without me. In a larger company, absolutely, you want to develop leadership skills at different levels and give people the chance to step up. And it's again the question of where are they going to feel comfortable having the vulnerability, asking the right questions. If you are a leader who's in the room, then you need to be really understanding of when it is you need to shut up. No matter what mistakes other people might be making in the moment, just let them do it. Let them grow out of it. See if somebody else steps up and corrects them. See where the steer goes, and talk to people quietly afterwards and say, "Hey, here's some feedback. Here's some context for next time." Or maybe grabbing somebody else and saying, "Hey, can you talk to so and so? I think they've got the wrong take on this, and we can help steer them in the right direction."
Yeah, I'm going to add this here from Faith Peterson, who mentions using Google critique in the classroom. Googling that in education, people are doing things with multi-role critique, and that seems so very interesting. I'm going to do that afterwards because I think to the point that Randy is speaking about and something I'm circling. Uh, we as product people need to do a better job at understanding how to do critique, because that's a part of some of the things that we're mentioning here. And one of the reasons why I, especially at first, want product leaders to stay away from these places is you may not be good at that. And you may be a reason why there's not psychological safety in your product room. And so whether you are or aren't, giving folks the time and the confidence to figure out and work out the kinks, just being a sponsor of folks having this time and making sure that they have this time to do this work is far more effective, is a far more effective place for you as a product leader versus putting yourself there. Because, and we could talk a whole other episode on the things I've learned coaching people going through this transition and going through it myself. And you're not an IC anymore. right? And so you have a different world of responsibilities. You're looked at differently in the organization. That includes the team. And so when it comes to communities of practice, for at first, um, get out, right? And I mean, this is advice that, I've chased CTOs out of room. I've chased like right as leaders. At first, we got to get out of there, right? We can't be in retros. We can't be in places where informal places. At least at first, we can sponsor them, but we can't be in them. Um, what do bad communities of practice look like?
God. Bad ones. I mean, generally, there aren't bad ones for very long because the reality is people just don't show up. And people vote with their feet on these things. But bad ones are if you're forced to be there, if people are talking at you instead of letting you talk to each other. Um, as you said, if their leaders are in the room, not because they're inherently bad to be there, but because their presence is inhibiting the psychological safety or the people to share and grow. So it's got to be something that's natural. Emily Weber is the person who literally wrote the book on communities of practice, and I'm lucky enough to be in a community with her, and I've learned so much from her on this. I have made every single mistake in growing, building, launching, and growing communities around things. Some of them I make over and over again, almost on purpose, because it's the only way I know how to do it. But the really key thing is you'll know it's going well if you are not the only organizer after the first few sessions. If you can get other people involved in it and it becomes self-sustaining and growing, then you've got a good, viable organism, a good, viable community that's going to keep going. If people are only showing up because you are programming it, you are curating it, you are leading it, you are facilitating it, you're doing a one-man or one-person show on it, then it may be temporarily good. You may be, that may be fine to get you over a hump and get it started. But if you don't have deputy organizers or co-organizers, ultimately it's going to fail. So this is that's the real key to success, is doing that. And you'll get them by avoiding some of those bad practices I mentioned earlier. But yeah, if people don't feel comfortable, they're not going to show up, and it's going to die a pretty quick death anyway.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've made these mistakes too, right? Back to what we were talking about earlier. For a lot of things, you're going to have to go through the process and get bruised to figure things out, which is, kind of another reason why I say kind of get leadership. If you're leadership, you want to get out because they gotta go through this. And I think you mentioned a really good point about having other points of view, other people getting involved, other people taking ownership, because that's how it'll evolve from what you think it's going to be to what's ultimately going to help the team itself. I have yet to experience this in my career where a process did not evolve. The ones that lived evolved. I'll just say it that way. The ones that stayed the same died, right? And there was no amount of bribing. There's no amount of forcing. There's no amount of kind of anything that keeps that thing alive. But if it evolves, it starts to match the organization that it's in, right? Things have a habit of living. I want to close on this, right? We talked about good, we talked about bad, we talked about why. What's one thing somebody can do after listening to this to start a community of practice?
I'll give you two things. One is just pull your finger out and start one. Just invite a few people. Say, hey, I'd like to get together to talk about some common stuff. See who's interested, and just book a time. Find a time to do it. If you're co-located and you're showing up in person, the most successful thing I did when I did it at Sainsbury's was I found that, and this might be a particularly British thing, the pub across the street from the office, they all have function rooms. They don't use them during the afternoon, and they're happy to give them to you for free. And this one happened to be in the basement, so no one had any signal. We all had to actually be present. Once you showed up, you were present, and the bar gave it to us for free because they assumed we'd stay for a drink afterwards, which we did. So that's a really nice thing. That's not the right culture everywhere. We're in the center of London. No one was driving. It was the right kind of thing for that culture. But you can find places even with no budget and do things like that. And you can find sponsors to do things. The other one, though, is, and this is kind of a self plug, but I'll plug a couple other people as well as part of this, is sometimes the reason you don't have a community is because you don't have the skill set internally to get it started. And you can talk to someone like me, you can talk to Petra Ville, you can talk to Emily Weber. There's a few other people out there who do this, who are all really interested in communities and helping companies build them and get them going. And the goal for somebody like me, anyway, is not to be there long term. I'd love to help you get a community going if that's what you need, but the success is it becoming a self-sustaining organism rather than something that you need an external consultant on. And the way to sell that, to sell a community in, to find the time and get sponsorship, is find a problem that in your company, find a problem that a sponsor will care about. Is it retention? Is it recruitment? Is it learning and development? Is it speed of development? Is it or speed of delivery of value? Anything like that. Just say, hey, I've got an idea. This isn't going to solve it completely. I'm not asking for much, but will you sponsor me in doing this? And if you say you're going to do it, they'll be very happy.
100%. Right. I think one thing this shows is an initiative, some initiative. I think teams understand this inherently, or leadership teams understand this inherently. And the things that we're talking about, although sometimes they don't display it, right? When we talk about loneliness or skill development, these are things that are talked about or discussed in leadership meetings all the time. Having I'm sorry, go ahead.
And if you want to see an example of a community that's live, that's working and going well, I run something called Product in the Ether. It's a PITA.social. It's a free virtual lean coffee for product people that I do every month. You can sign up on the mailing list there. You're welcome to come and learn about and see what a functioning community looks like. Obviously, if you are pretty much anywhere in the world, there's wonderful meetups held every month by Product 10 communities. Those are wonderful places to go for a more general one. And then people often form their own smaller communities as part of that. There's a lot. So you don't, if you want to see one before you start one, those are good places to go.
I'll co-sign that one as somebody that has done a Product in the Ether or two. Very good, very good, very good community. The conversations are wide ranging. You get people from all different types of product management that understand your context, and even though it's not internal to your company, right? It's a solve for the two things that we mentioned here, which is loneliness, right? You're talking to other product people who understand what you're doing, and then skills development. Like I've gotten a chance to learn and then further network with folks from a Product in the Ether around a whole litany of subjects. So highly recommend stopping by to one of Randy's meetups because they are good. I dropped a link in the LinkedIn. Also, I have to say, Randy, as a practitioner of lean coffee, you're really good at it. So I've stolen a thing or two from you in the past. So figure I'd say that publicly.
We also
somebody accuses me.
Fantastic.
And with that, I want to thank you, Randy, for a tremendous conversation around communities of practice. I have dropped in the LinkedIn notes here. You'll see all the links to the things that we've talked about today, including Randy's article on the communities of practice. And I think it's a great accompanying piece to this conversation. So go ahead and read it. We've got PETA Social in there. We got liberating structures. We got what a design critique is. We got what a lean coffee is. We got all that stuff in there. So go check that out. I want to say thank you, Randy, for joining us today.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks to everyone who listened and watched. Thanks for the great questions, and Faith, thanks for the really great suggestion.
Outstanding. And with that, we will see you on the internet. Check out our websites and bye.
Bye.
Finish.